Jason, thank you very much for joining us with this virtual conversation that we're having. Now, to introduce you, Jason is leading the Department of Planning and Economic Development at the City of Hamilton, Canada. Delighted to have someone with his expertise involved. So, Jason, to kick things off, what would you say it is about cities that you love?
Sure, and it's an interesting question, and it's a big question. And probably the easiest answer is sort of always what's not to love. I do love to see other cities around the world. I don't think I've ever been to a city where you didn't take something away. You didn't see something that kind of interested you or inspired you or made you think a little bit differently about things you could do in your own city. I think every city's got a little bit of something. And I think it's because we're all wrestling with really the exact same issues. The context might be different, the scale of the issues might be different, but cities are about, they're about, housing and environmental sustainability and mobility and public space and social justice and history and culture and art. All of that thing is what cities are. And it doesn't matter if you're London, like where you are, very major, big global city, right down to small towns and cities like my own, a city of 500,000 people in Canada, kind of a formal industrial city that's reinventing itself. We're all facing the same issues and struggling with the same issues. And I've always thought that cities have a great deal to learn from one another, and urbanists and city planners have a great deal to learn from one another. It's kind of one of the reasons why I was intrigued by what you do here, is it's a great way to just share stories. And I think some of the best city building, the best city planning comes from people sharing stories.
I think that's a great way to put it, Jason. And I think just following up on that, now we're a platform that tries to encourage people to get involved in their city and more specifically within their local place. So do you think there will be an increase in interest in people wanting to improve their local area as a result of the pandemic?
I think there absolutely is, and I think it's for a few different reasons. And one is probably right now for many people, they're discovering their neighborhood and their immediate surroundings in a way that they've maybe never had to really think about before. We're a society that has such great mobility options. We can travel across cities, across regions so easily that you forget about the importance of your immediate surroundings and your immediate neighborhood. And I think people are starting to realize the importance of things like, can I buy a loaf of bread? Can I walk out my front door, not have to get on a bus or a subway, or not necessarily have to get into a car, just can I walk somewhere and get a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread, those essentials that I need? Can you do that in your neighborhood? Can you go to a park and get some sunshine, get some exercise without having to travel to a different part of your city or a different region in your area? I think people are really going to be thinking differently about neighborhood because we've been confined to our neighborhoods for so long, for so many weeks. And also just think about the variety and the interest and the beauty in your neighborhood. Probably if most people are like myself, I've walked my own block every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. And you start to realize just how important that your immediate surroundings are. And I think that's going to cause people to become more engaged in their neighborhoods. They're going to become more insistent upon having great public space, more insistent about having good access to services and stores and recreation opportunities. I think that's going to be one of the big changes we're going to see, one of the big positive changes we're going to see coming out of this experience.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in quite nicely to my next question, Jason. I think you sort of answered it slightly there, but it was really, what are the major changes we're going to see going forward in different Canadian cities? I mean, you sort of mentioned the access to public spaces, the engagement from communities. Do you think there might be anything else that we'll slowly start to see come to fruition?
I think there's a great number of things. I'm always a little bit careful. I'm a professional planner by background, and I would say we have to remember that I think some of our worst moments as a profession is when city planners maybe are a little too confident in thinking we know what the future is going to hold, and maybe a little too confident in thinking that we have the answers for a future that we really can't predict with any certainty. So I know there's been a lot written lot of blogs, a lot of social media posts, a lot of articles right now being written about how cities are going to change in the future. And I think one of the most important things to remember is we really don't know, and we're never going to know. So it's always going to be about flexibility and resiliency and adaptability for an uncertain future. And I think the planning profession especially has to always keep that in mind, because like I said, absolute certainty tends to get us into some difficulty as a profession. That said, I think there are certainly some signs of things that we should be preparing for. We should be preparing for significant differences in mobility. I think people are going to move around cities very differently, at least in the near term and maybe permanently. And that's around things like transit. I think transit is going to be a very different mode of transportation in the months and possibly years to come. I think people's interest and demand in being able to walk around their communities and cycle around their communities, I think is going to grow. Public space, I think, is going to be very significant. I think people are really realizing how important public space is right now, how precious it is, and how important it is to have not just, one great big waterfront park in your city, but multiple smaller public spaces in all neighborhoods that people can enjoy. In the rich neighborhoods and the poor neighborhoods, all of these neighborhoods need to have these kinds of places. Those things I think are definitely going to change. I don't think we know exactly how, but they're things we've got to be ready for. And I think housing will change as well. I'm sure it's the same in the UK around people looking at the quality of housing, the access to outdoor space, even balcony space in housing, any sort of opportunity to get fresh air. And I think we're going to be talking about multi-generational housing. I think there's going to be some concerns about, having your parents, your seniors in retirement homes and those sorts of facilities. I think we're going to see more multi-generational households staying within the same home, and that's going to really change what we think what housing has to be if we start to see those sorts of changes. So it's exciting in a way. I think there is going to be a lot that's going to change, but I think we also just have to be ready for the unknown.
It's very fascinating, Jason. I really did actually appreciate some of the input you've given there. I mean, multi-generational housing is something we are seeing more and more in the UK, so I definitely echo that sentiment. I suppose another question that I'd be quite keen to hear your answer on is, with what's going on at the moment, are there any positives that maybe we can take from it that might help you with your mission going forward?
I think so. I think there are a few sort of positive trends that will come out of this. We've talked about a few already around public space, for example, and around having more complete communities with different opportunities for recreation, for shopping, for playing, for getting the basic necessities that you need, all within close proximity to your home. I think those will be some positive trends. I think another thing that will become that is sort of maybe a new awareness for a lot of people is just how important it is for us to get together, and how important, how I think underappreciated just being out with other people, with strangers, with friends, with family is. Once you take something like that away, people really realize how much they treasure it and how much they value it. And I think that could potentially have a really positive impact in our cities. I think it's going to mean that we're going to value much more our gathering spaces. We're going to value much more our restaurant rows and our cafes and the places where we go where we can see other people and interact with other people. It may happen differently in the future, but I think people are really realizing just how important that is to their quality of life, to their mental health, to their sanity, to be able to have those sorts of opportunities. And a lot of what city building and professional planning about is creating those opportunities for people to interact, creating those opportunities for some social life and public life. And I think one thing that this pandemic has caused is people to realize just how valuable that is.
Absolutely agree. I think that's going to be definitely the silver lining going forward, is the appreciation of coming together with loved ones and our closest relatives. So absolutely agree with that. I think really just to sort of finalize the interview, Jason, it'll be good to hear from you how you think things might change for you in terms of work in the near future, in the long-term future. How have you adapted to the current situation we're in, and will it be dare I say, a prolonged adaptation that you make? I
think it will be a prolonged adaptation. I think one of the there's a number of things that I think we've done in terms of, in my own role as a public servant and how we deliver city services and public services, that we've learned some things through this process, and there's probably some things that we've learned and we've done which are valuable during a pandemic or not during a pandemic, and some things that we'll continue to do. I look at things like one of the roles of my department is we do all the planning approvals and building approvals and all of those sorts of things that happen in a city. We have over the past couple of years been trying to do more of that kind of service online and digitally for reasons of cost savings, efficiency, customer service. Now there's going to be a real necessity to that sort of approach. I think we're going to be looking at all of our services, and in the back of our minds, there will always be this question of, will this help us if we end up in another pandemic or if this happens again? So I think it's going to accelerate a lot of good just business practices and business processes in municipalities and in cities and in how we deliver public services. I think there's also going to be a permanent change in how in our work relationships and working from home and remote working. I don't think we'll continue to all of us be at home from now on. People will come back to the office, but it will be different. And I think some of the fears about working from home and remote working have maybe been alleviated a little bit now that people have been thrown into this experience. And so there'll be more of an openness to allowing that to happen going forward. And that's going to have pretty big impacts, again, in how we deliver public services. But it's going to have impacts on mobility. It's going to have impacts on real estate that will be important as well. So certainly there's a lot to be learned just in the processes of government that I don't think there's going to be any going back from. And I think that's a good thing.
And do you think it might speed up the system, the planning system overall, if we're doing most of the meetings and let's say engaging with particular stakeholders, if we're doing it virtually, will it expedite the process in some instances?
That's an interesting question, and I'll say what I've seen so far is in some cases it speeds things up, in some cases it slows things down. In some cases we've seen that maybe we don't need to meet face-to-face quite so often on everything. There's some things that can just get done and decisions can just get made. But especially in something like planning and when you're dealing with issues of urban design and architecture, there is great value in people being able to sit around a table with concepts and maps and plans on the table in front of them and have a conversation. Some of the best planning, I think, some of the best urban design, some of the best architecture happens through conversation. And that's tough to do in a WebEx environment like this or in a Zoom environment like this. It's hard to have that back and forth. So I do miss that. I do miss that opportunity to kind of have people roll up their sleeves, get in a room together and problem solve. And so I think there'll never be any replacement for having that opportunity, at least every once in a while.
Fantastic. Jason, I think that's a great way to end the interview. And as I said once again earlier, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the call and to introduce you to our audience. Look, in the future, I mean, as I said, when we're out of the lockdown and probably going to be next year when we start our first few events, it will be great to have you attend one of the ones that we put together.
I'd love to do that, and thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. Like I said at the beginning, the great storytelling is really a part of great urbanism, and I think this kind of thing that you're doing, where people all over the world can exchange ideas and thoughts and experiences, is really, really helpful. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Fantastic, brilliant, appreciate it, Jason. Enjoy the rest of your week and keep safe.
Thanks.